Many of President Donald Trump's actions so far are being done through executive orders, but to accomplish much of this agenda, he needs legislation and a budget. And that falls on Congress, folks. And his plans for one big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, well, that's now moving through Congress, although it may end up being more bills than one. Also, meanwhile, there's been a lot of talk over whether Donald Trump could get a third term in office. And that would require a constitutional amendment, and a proposal for that has actually now been introduced by a Republican representative. And also in other news, a COVID-like virus could be making a comeback. There have been ongoing claims coming out of China of an unknown virus, and now the Chinese regime is reporting it as well. And guess where it's coming from? The Wuhan lab, the same one the focus of the virus was on last time. I'll be talking about these stories and more today, so let's get started. First of all, folks, GOP representative on this. There's a brewing debate on whether President Donald Trump could get a third term in office. And to change this would require a new constitutional amendment, and a proposal for this has actually now been introduced. Donald Trump himself had also previously been asked about the idea. And the issue was raised a couple weeks ago as well when Representative Andy Ogles, a Republican from Tennessee, was discussing his bill to amend the Constitution and open the door for Trump to run for a third term as president. Newsweek said this February 3rd. It said Republican Tennessee Representative Andy Ogles is continuing to push his amendment to allow President Donald Trump to run for a third term in office. In a Sunday interview with Newsmax, Ogles said his bill to amend the Constitution will face an uphill battle to be ratified, but said the plan is very important for the future of the U.S. And Ogles introduced a House joint resolution on January 23rd to amend the part of the Constitution that would prevent a president from being elected more than twice. And Ogles suggested the 22nd Amendment be altered to state that no person shall be elected to the office of president more than 3 times, nor serve any additional term after serving 2 consecutive terms. And notes the wording of Ogles' amendment proposal suggests that previous consecutive 2-term presidents like Barack Obama or George W. Bush would not be allowed to run for a third term. And notes that under Article 5 of the Constitution, any amendment requires approval from 2/3 of the House and Senate, and then must be ratified by at least 38 of the 50 U.S. states. So Republicans probably don't have the votes for that just yet. But look, Representative Ogles explained his reasoning for this in a January 23rd press release, and here's what he said. He said, President Trump's decisive leadership stands in stark contrast to the chaos, suffering, and economic decline Americans have endured over the last 4 years. He has proven himself to be the only figure in modern history capable of reversing our nation's decay and restoring America to greatness. And he must be given the time necessary to accomplish that goal. To that end, he said, I'm proposing an amendment to the Constitution to revise the limitations imposed by the 22nd Amendment on presidential terms. This amendment would allow President Trump to serve 3 terms, ensuring that we can sustain the bold leadership our nation so desperately needs. And he adds as well, quote, it is imperative that we provide President Trump with every resource necessary to correct the disastrous course set by the Biden administration. And President Trump, he says, has shown time and time again that his loyalty lies with the American people and our great nation above all else. He is dedicated to restoring the republic and saving our country, and we as legislators and as states must do everything in our power to support him, he says. Now, the proposed amendment states this. It says, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than 3 times, nor be elected to any additional term after being elected to 2 consecutive terms, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term for which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Essentially saying that, if you win an election and then lose an election, then win again, you have a gap between the first and second term. In that case, you can run for a third term. If it's consecutive, meaning you win and then you win again, like most presidents, then you can't keep running. And so in other words, this would allow, as he says, Trump to run again. This would not allow many other former presidents to run again. But there's been discussion on this for a while now, actually. This is not like a new argument. One of the arguments is around, in Trump's first term in office, you had the Russiagate scandal, you had other attacks on him that turned out to be fake. You had the effect of really crippling a lot of what he planned to do. Remember, Trump was trying to do a lot in his first term. He was dealing with investigations. He was dealing with people trying to push him out of office, remove him from office. A lot of that was based on false information being circulated from within his own government in many cases. And one line of logic was this: if contempt is a crime against the judiciary, right, contempt of the court, if contempt is a crime against Congress, right, congressional contempt, then could there also be contempt against the executive branch, the president? Now, we of course never saw a challenge on that front, but the idea that Trump may run for a third term hasn't really gone away. And there are some arguments, and have been for a while now, that because of the attacks on him during his first term, that could represent a type of contempt against the executive branch. And based on that, they could nullify some of that and maybe have him run again. Now, Time magazine also raised the question with Trump during an interview in April of 2024. And let me show you how that went. This is Time magazine, April 2024, and they said this: both the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 and the American Conservative magazine, they're a big supporter of yours and have proposed abolishing the 22nd Amendment that limits presidents to 2 terms. They say that, if you come back into office, you will have served 2 non-consecutive terms, and that if the popular will is there for you, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to. And they note the proposal came from the American Conservative, not Project 2025, which they amended later. But then they say this. Let me show you. Trump replied this. He said, "I didn't know they did that." Well, would you definitely retire after a third term, or would you consider challenging the 22nd Amendment, they ask? Trump says, "Well, I would, and I don't really have a choice, but I would." You would consider it, they ask? Trump said, "Well, I'm at a point where I think. I would do that. Look, it's 2 terms. I had 2 elections. I did much better on the second one than I did the first. I got millions more votes. I was treated very unfairly. They used COVID to cheat and lots of other things to cheat. But I was treated very unfairly. But no, I'm not." He said, "I'm going to serve 1 term. I'm going to do a great job. We're going to have a very successful country again, but you'd consider it," they ask. And Trump said, "And then I'm going to leave." You'd consider it, you said? Trump said, "Consider what?" Challenging the 22nd Amendment. And then Trump said this. He said, "I don't know anything about it. I mean, you're telling me that somebody's looking to terminate. I would not, in other words, would not be in favor of it. I wouldn't be in favor of a challenge. Not from me. I wouldn't be in favor of it at all. I intend to serve 4 years and do a great job, and I want to bring our country back. I want to put it back on the right track. Our country is going down. We're a failing nation right now. We're a nation in turmoil." So let me kind of break that down, right? In terms of what Trump said there, it was a bit of back and forth. He stated I'm at a point where I think, I would do that, suggesting he would potentially run for a third term. But when it came specifically to the idea of challenging the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution, he said he wouldn't be in favor of it at all. So you can take that for what you will. It seems based on that, he would be up for the idea of running again if it could be done without challenging the Constitution. So look, we'll see. We could also just, he could change his mind, of course. And as some have pointed out, Trump has continued to mention the idea. In fact, he recently joked about it during remarks at the National Prayer Breakfast a couple weeks back. Let me show you this.
But now I want to be here with you, and I have been here with you. Thank you. And I do that despite the fact that they say I can't run again. That's the expression, sir. Then somebody said, "I don't think you can." Oh. Now I want to be with you regardless, and it's an honor.
Now, The Independent said this as well. He noted that Obama Associate White House Counsel and the executive director of the nonprofit Protect Democracy organization, Ian Bissin, told Politico, quote, anyone who says that obviously the 22nd Amendment will deter Trump from trying for a third term has been living on a different planet other than the one I've been living on. And it notes that other than amending or repealing the 22nd Amendment, there's possibility that Trump could have something else. It says Trump could also try to exploit a loophole in the amendment that would possibly allow him to run for vice president, only to become president after the election, Politico noted. Because look, here's what it says. He could also simply run for president again, banking on the notion that a supportive Supreme Court would not step in to stop him, and he may also simply refuse to leave the White House and try to end American democracy as we know it, they say. Now, I notice that Trump has suggested for years that he may run for a third term, and here's a quote. It says, we're going to win 4 more years, and then after that, we'll go for another 4 years, he said in August 2020. And it notes in May 2024, speaking at the National Rifle Association's annual meeting, Trump said, quote, you know, FDR, 16 years, almost 16 years. He was 4 terms. I don't know. Are we going to be considered 3-term or 2-term? You decide. Now look, also some of you might remember when Trump first made headlines by suggesting that he might just stay in office kind of indefinitely. Well, there's a bit more to that. Again, he made headlines by suggesting he might just stay in office kind of forever. And this goes back to a meme he posted on Twitter from June of 2019. Watch this. Now, in other news, folks, many of President Donald Trump's actions are so far, a lot of them are being done through executive orders and executive actions. And to make things solid, he would need legislation. And to accomplish much of that agenda, he also needs a budget. Now, this falls on Congress. And his plans for, quote unquote, one big beautiful bill, as he's been calling it, well, that's also moving through, although it may end up being more than one bill. The Epoch Times said this. President Donald Trump on February 21st said he was open to multiple budget bills to fund his policy initiatives after earlier this week endorsing a one-bill approach adopted by the House Republicans. His remarks came hours after Senate Republicans passed a budget blueprint that calls for 2 bills to implement Trump's agenda. The Senate version has been cast as a backup plan in case House Republicans are unable to pass their bill. And notes the House is set to vote on its version of the budget plan next week. Republicans in the Senate and House, who hold slim majorities in both bodies, are undertaking the process in order to authorize nearly $5 trillion in new spending to fulfill Trump's campaign promises, ranging from the construction of a wall along the U.S. border with Mexico to the extension of tax reductions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. On February 21st, Trump indicated he was indifferent to the number of reconciliation bills that may be used to enact such funding, which has been a point of disagreement between the two chambers for several weeks. Trump said, you could do 3, you could do 10, as long as we get along, as long as we get them all added up, and it's the same thing, said Trump during an interview with the Brian Kilmeade show on Fox News Radio. He says, it gives you optionality. Now, on this front, folks, the first reconciliation bill going through, that would authorize funding for border security and for military spending. The second bill they're trying to push through, that's the one facing more challenges. That one is on tax cut extensions and on raising the debt limit. Remember, normally they raise the debt limit. A lot of times Republicans don't like that. Trump is pushing for it this time. He wants the money to do what he needs to do. And it's also controversial since some argue that second bill would cut Medicaid spending. That's one of the big reasons it's controversial. and could also be debated because Trump and the Doge Department, well, remember they're trying to root out alleged Medicare and Medicaid fraud, which would mean the money would actually go further if you believe the narrative on that. But back to the bills, right? Republicans are working on different plans right now in case they cannot get the votes they need for the one bill plan. And it also helps them that, these are reconciliation bills, which means they don't need as many votes to get them passed. Basically, here's how it goes. If Republicans can all agree, then it gets done. And if they can't agree, well, then it gets dragged up for who knows how long. Epoch Times said this: reconciliation bills, which only apply to measures related to taxation, spending, and public borrowing, require a simple majority to pass in the upper chamber. The bills also cannot increase the deficit after 10 years and cannot include pure policy reforms such as changes to asylum laws that Trump also seeks. To begin the reconciliation process, the Senate and House of Representatives must pass a budget resolution that sets funding levels for the fiscal year and instructs committees to make recommendations for spending increases or cuts. Now it notes this: the Senate passed its version of the resolution by a vote of 52 to 48, basically along party lines. And it notes further in, the resolution has been rejected by Trump, who prefers the resolution being considered by the House. The Senate plan calls for 2 reconciliation bills, with the second being focused on the politically complicated issues of taxation and the sovereign debt limit, which Trump wants to do away with, that are dividing Senate Republicans at present. The House plan would also, it says, have just one, a decision that House Speaker Mike Johnson has explained is due to the fragile consensus in his conference. Now, on this front, to make sense of that, this is basically what's happening. They have the one big, beautiful bill, as Trump calls it, and then there's also, alongside that one big, beautiful bill, 2 separate bills with basically the same things, just divided based on what could be easier to pass and what would be harder to pass. And I know it sounds complicated, but basically, it's likely these will move forward and then eventually make it to Trump's desk to be signed. It's possible that having 2 bills could make it easier to, partially pass, but it could also be argued that will delay things more because Congress will have to go back and forth on the more contentious parts of it. And essentially, it's actually Republicans blocking this right now. Republicans, well, you could argue it's Democrats too, because they need to basically get at least like one Democrat on if they lose a Republican. But they can pass this without a single Democrat on board with it, which is kind of how they're doing it right now. The issue is not all Republicans agree either. Now, folks, in other news, a COVID-like virus could be making a comeback. There have been ongoing claims coming out of China of an unknown virus, and the scenes in China, they're actually very similar to what we saw in the early days of the COVID outbreak. Now, the Chinese Communist Party, until now, was mostly writing it off, censoring it, saying nothing's going on. There wasn't much official reporting outside of Chinese social media with images of, again, lines outside of crematoriums, people dying, hospitals full, that kind of thing. There's a lot of videos right now. But now it seems the CCP and its media, they're starting to report it. And it's coming out of the same Wuhan lab that was the focus of the virus last time. New York Post said this. It said researchers at the Chinese lab accused of leaking the COVID-19 virus have now discovered a new coronavirus in bats that closely matches the one that led to the deadly worldwide outbreak in 2020, according to a study. Now it notes the virus unearthed at the Wuhan Institute of Virology carries the risk of animal to human transmission, though the infection, they say, has not yet been identified in a living person, according to a study published in the scientific journal Cell. The bat virus, referred to as HKU5-CoV2, remember CoV2, SARS-CoV-2 was, COVID-19. They say it uses the same human receptor as SARS-CoV-2, a strain of the coronavirus that caused COVID-19. The newly discovered bat strain, they say, can infect cells by binding to proteins found throughout the human body and other mammals, according to the study led by the notorious bat lady virologist Dr. Shi Zhengli. The potential for the virus to spill over into humans, they say, remains to be investigated, the study says. Now look, if some of those names are familiar, it's because, well, they're the same names back when COVID-19 was first being reported in China. Dr. Shi Zhengli was the same person who was going to the bat caves in China, became the focal point of a lot of the news, and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that was the virus lab in China that was later shown to have some really serious security gaps that everybody's been trying to investigate, and really no other country's been allowed to go in. So folks, we will see what happens with this. But look, I'll keep you updated. But in other news, the Trump administration is now investigating government spending. And there are allegations that millions in American tax dollars were improperly sent for pension payments to unions. And now, while there are calls for the Justice Department to get that money back. I'll be talking more about this after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Now, folks, in other news, the Trump administration is now investigating government spending, and there are allegations that millions in American tax dollars were improperly spent on pension payments to unions. And now something interesting is happening. There are calls for the Department of Justice to get that money back. Just the News said this. It said Republican lawmakers are urging the Department of Justice to recover millions of taxpayer dollars sent as pensions to thousands of deceased Americans, dead people. And as the Education and Workforce Committee Chairman Tim Walberg, Republican from Michigan, and Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions Subcommittee Chair Rick Allen, a Republican from Georgia, sent a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi on Friday requesting an update about the DOJ, Department of Justice investigation into improper payments sourced from federal COVID-19 aid to multi-employer union pension plans. Now it notes, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan in 2021, which created the Special Financial Assistance Program, the SFA, to save the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, which was failing financially, they say. Now that organization, the PBGC, proceeded to approve over $127 million in SFA program overpayments for at least 3,479 deceased participants of the Central States Pension Fund. Although the DOJ announced it had entered a civil settlement agreement with Central States to recover the wrongly allocated money, more than 60 other plans received similar improper payments and only half repaid, a total of nearly $165 million in taxpayer money. Now, folks, look, when it comes to government spending, this may not seem massive, right? Just $165 million. But what's important is the big picture. $100 million in one area, $100 million in another, and another, and another. Well, then it starts adding up. And this is what we're seeing right now. The Doge Department with Musk has been finding payments similar to this on a fairly ongoing basis. They've continued identifying 10 million here, 50 million here, a billion here, 10 billion here, 300 billion here. And we're getting a clearer picture of what our tax money was being spent on. It does seem there was a lot of problems, although it's still being investigated. And of course, as they investigate whether things were really improperly done or just maybe they're the ones making the mistake, we'll get answers on that hopefully eventually. But on that point also, Elon Musk also rolled out a new initiative through Doge, and he's requiring all government workers, every single one of them, except for like in law enforcement. FBI is not doing it, for example. But he's requiring all government workers to fill out a simple inquiry asking them, what did you do last week in terms of measurable work in their jobs in government? And interestingly, this is what's happening. Any government employee who fails to respond to that email will allegedly get fired. Here's what Elon Musk wrote on X. He said, quote, consistent with President Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. He said failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. Now, the Epoch Times reported on what this actually looks like, and it said this. It said federal employees, including, interestingly, some judges, court staff, and federal prison officials, received a 3-line email with this instruction. Quote, please reply to this email with approximately 5 bullet points of what you accomplished last week and CC your manager. What did you do last week? 5 points, just do 5 things. Now, as this new requirement rolls out, Elon Musk also explained some of his thinking behind it, and he wrote this on X. He said the reason this matters is that a significant number of people who are supposed to be working for the government are doing so little work that they are not checking their email at all. In some cases, he said, we believe non-existent people or the identities of dead people are being used to collect paychecks, suggesting the government, some of them don't even work at all, and it's dead people, and people are filing for fake positions, ghost jobs, and taking the money. And so he said, in other words, there is outright fraud. Maybe we'll get answers on this, right? Now, we should get a clearer picture on whether that is the case or whether this is just Elon Musk speculating. We don't know yet. The Trump administration has a new policy of what he calls, quote, radical transparency. And in fact, the White House released a memo to the heads of executive departments and agencies on, quote, radical transparency. And it says radical transparency for wasteful spending. This is what it says. It says the United States government spends too much money on programs, contracts, and grants that do not promote the interests of the American people. And it says for too long, taxpayers have subsidized ideological projects overseas, and domestic organizations engage in actions that undermine the national interest. It notes the American people have seen their tax dollars used to fund the passion projects of unelected bureaucrats rather than to advance the national interest. It notes the American people have a right to see how the federal government has wasted their hard-earned wages. I therefore direct the heads of executive departments and agencies to take all appropriate actions to make public, to the maximum extent permitted by law, and as the heads of agencies deem appropriate, to promote the policies of my administration, the complete details of every terminated program, canceled contract, terminated grant, or any other discontinued obligation of federal funds. And he says this, agencies shall ensure that such publication occurs in accordance with all applicable laws, regulations, and the terms and conditions of the underlying contract, grant, or other award. And so in other words, all that money being spent by the government, as they audit this, as they look into it, right, they will supposedly, based on this order, show us what was actually cut. Because again, as you're watching the news, there are allegations on the Trump side. They're only cutting crazy stuff like, sex changes for animals in various countries. And on the other side of it, you have the Democrats saying they're cutting important things, right? Medicare, Medicaid, they're alleging, although we have not seen that yet, notably. But if the public is being allowed to see everything that is cut, well, radical transparency, we can get an idea of it. And look, alongside the investigations and audits, right, we are in fact seeing a very large public information campaign. And so who knows, maybe we'll get the answers to all of this soon. Maybe the public will know very soon. We'll have to wait and see. Folks, that said, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. Let's see here. First off, Aaron Shimano, you saying, there's no point for Trump to have a third term or fourth or fifth. He won't be there forever. If no one person can step up in the next 4 years to become a competent U.S. president, there's no hope for America. Don't rely, don't rely only on one man. Well, that's a good point too, because actually we are seeing that happen with the Democrats right now. They've had a huge political shakeup. And Democrats essentially right now are relatively leaderless. It's very hard to get a good leader, actually. And I think sometimes too, you'll have countries and other people to kind of wait around for a very long time before you have a good leader step forward. A very good leader can help a country, a very bad leader can ruin a country. Simple as that. And I do think it's a very good idea. I do think it's a very good idea, a very good policy to try to educate a younger generation and build people who are moral and good people so that you can have a good pool of people to pull from for good leaders. Personally, I think we do have a lot of good people in this country. Personally, I do think that we could have a lot of good presidents. And it is true, you know, look, let's be honest, Trump is he's getting pretty old. He's not showing a lack of energy by any means. He's not showing a lack of energy by any means, but he is getting pretty old, right? And some people are pointing to this. You know, look, Trump, in terms of how he moves around and does Trump events and so on, I don't have that kind of energy. You know, I don't have that kind of energy. I think most people don't have that kind of energy. Somehow he does, so maybe he would have the energy for it. But again, he is getting pretty old, right? Some people are suggesting that J.D. Vance would be a good candidate. You know, in the early days of the campaign trail, a lot of people had their doubts about J.D. Vance, but, you know, since he's become vice president, I think especially after the presidential debates, the VP debates, a lot of people kind of saw him as doing pretty well, and I think a lot of Republicans like him. Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, you know, he might try to run again. Remember, he was doing pretty well until Trump was raided at Mar-a-Lago, and then Trump rose in the polls. A lot of Republicans like him. Actually, on the Democrat side right now, in terms of polling, Kamala Harris is still polling higher than basically any other Democrat, so maybe she'll be back. But there's also people talking about the Trump family. Some people say Don Jr. could be a possibility. Some people say that Barron Trump may be a future candidate if people really want a continuation of Trump. And look, in America, we do tend to have this kind of dynastic system. We have the Clintons and we have the Bushes, right? And, maybe we'll have the Trumps now. And so there is a possibility with that, right? Jerry, you're saying, I believe that George Washington set a great standard of 2 terms, regardless of gap and leave. Think of this down the road, and someone bad getting a 3rd term. What will you be saying then? Yeah, and that's the challenge with law in general. I was having a conversation with someone recently. That, for example, let's give an example of just normal law. I was having a conversation with somebody about, constitutional limits on, let's say, like surveillance, right? That, for example, there are government agencies that have, vehicles, for example, that just scan every single license plate of every single car in terms of what they do. They scan every license plate, they get your information, and they basically investigate every person driving by. There are things like that. There are government agencies that buy data, right? They buy data. And of course, many people would suggest that is a constitutional violation because we have limits on the ability for, searches and seizures. You can't just investigate people when there's no evidence of a crime and when you don't have a warrant. Now, the counter argument to that is this. Well, what if there's been a kidnapping? What if your kid was kidnapped and somebody is driving a car and you need to find that car and you need to scan license plates to find that car? Would you support it then? That's the big question. I can tell you personally, if my daughter was kidnapped, yes, I would want them scanning the license plate of every car in the entire country. Yes, I would, because I care about my family. But, when it comes to law, the other side of it is this. You could argue for an overstepping of law when your own personal interests are on the line. And to what extent would you sacrifice freedom and sacrifice basic rights for the sake of the interest of one individual or a few individuals? And that is the challenge of law. That is always the challenge of law. Yes, by getting rights to carry out unauthorized searches and seizures, you probably could prevent a lot of crimes. You could probably help a lot of people. But is it worth the sacrifice? Is it worth the overstepping of those, standards that restrict things and make sure we do not live under a tyrannical regime? Would you risk the creation of a tyrannical regime for the sake of eliminating, alleviating some suffering of individuals who are victims of crime? That is always the challenge of law. There's always a sliding scale, right, between security and freedom. That is the challenge we face. Do you want absolute security? Do you want absolute freedom? Or do you want somewhere in the middle? That is the balancing act of all governments. And again, when it comes to people running for like third terms or fourth terms, the limit to 2 terms is also what prevents us from having dictators. It's what prevents us from living under tyrants, right? You can get a bad president, they're out in 4 or 8 years. If you eliminate terms, they might be in there their entire lives. On that point too, we have great members of Congress. Some people suggest we should have term limits. We have fantastic, some of them, members of the Supreme Court. Some people suggest we should have term limits. It's true that when you're in the winning side and your guys are doing well, you probably want them to stay in, but is it better to have term limits? Those might be applied elsewhere as well. Let's see, another question here, Ashley from California. You're saying, speaking of the budget, is it true the U.S. has been sending China foreign aid? I did see Senator Rand Paul say that. You're saying, so we're giving aid to a country we owe money to, so we're paying them interest to give them money. Then they then use that money to help fund anti-American campaigns. So Rand Paul recently said that, or at least that was going around. I was actually trying to find his original tweet on that. I did see people posting screenshots of it. I was not able to immediately find the source of that. I'm not clear whether he said it in an official post or an older post or in a comment, again, replying to somebody. But there are screenshots of him saying that, allegedly. I need to investigate it. I was actually trying to find it this morning. But I will say this, when it comes to China, basically, the United States defines the Chinese Communist Party, like China, as a developing country. The CCP and basically the entire news industry, they say China is a first world country, although legally defined as a third world country, even though the wages of the overwhelming majority of the population is like $100 a month or something ridiculous like that, meaning they are like beyond impoverished. But the problem is if you're a Communist Party member, you do live like a king because, again, you're ripping off the entire country, and that's part of how communism always works. It would be like if you judged the Soviet Union and you only looked at the Soviet oligarchy. Of course, you're going to have wealthy people, but that does not represent the majority of the population, let alone like the gulags and the labor camps and everything else. China has forced labor, slavery, they have torture camps. They have the whole 9 yards, and even the average citizen there, they have the 996 policy, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, and getting paid crumbs, meaning, you don't really have a very good quality of life typically. Now, in addition to all of this, though, despite the CCP openly declaring that they want to destroy the United States, despite the CCP refusing to let the United States investigate the Wuhan Institute of Virology, despite the CCP even openly saying they intend to undermine us, attack us through every single means, unrestricted warfare. And despite the Chinese Communist Party even trying to actively undermine the US dollar by creating a BRICS currency and trying to challenge us by creating alternative banking systems and stating publicly they intend to do that and using every single means at their disposal to try to destroy the United States, yes, we give them ridiculous amounts of benefits. Most favored nation trading status, benefits on international shipping, cuts on funds, things that could be considered aid on all these fronts. And yes, we basically allow them to siphon money out. We let them have, again, trade benefits that incentivize our corporations and our manufacturing hubs to all put their businesses in China. And we let them do this while they openly say that they aim to destroy us. And we also let them invite our politicians, our, business leaders, members of the police force and so on, to go to China and be subverted and then become puppets of the CCP when they do that. We let them do that. And we openly let them operate, again, tongs, which not all of them are bad, but a lot of them are, which openly work on operations of what they call the United Front to subvert our entire political system. We let them do that. Why do we let them do that? You tell me. Maybe it's corruption, maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's a bit of both. Maybe it's something else, who knows? But I do think America is getting fed up. I do think people are waking up to it and they are getting fed up. And I do think there's a time limit on it. I think that time limit is coming to an end. Martin McKenzie, in case in point, they are carrying out investigations on the financial front, and they are going to start renegotiating our trade deals with China, which the Trump administration has now said we lose out on more than with any other country on earth. More than any other country. And they're also talking about renewing some of the policies of investigating Chinese espionage. Martin McKenzie, you're saying, with all the attention to studying bat viruses, do they want another COVID emergency? Are they looking for a likely viral candidate? Maybe. That is the problem of the world not fully pushing to have investigations into the origin of the first time around. Isn't it interesting? The exact same Wuhan Institute of Virology, the exact same individuals involved, and basically some of the exact same claims on findings are now emerging, as did 2019, 2020. Isn't that interesting? And interestingly as well, I would add, the CCP's financial status, the stability of the Chinese Communist Party, the imminent collapse of the CCP economically, is about the same right now as it was 2019, 2020, when they used COVID-19, in addition to the virus itself, as a means to destroy the global economy and then declare to the world they were bouncing back in time to invest in China. Isn't that interesting? I would say part of this is problematic because aside from the idea that they might release a new virus, or maybe there's something already spreading, which might also be the case. If you were to ask me about COVID-19, I personally do think it was I think it came from the horseshoe bat based on the information that came out from the findings on it. And I do believe that, again, the horseshoe bat virus contained at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was very likely a leak of a natural virus. That's my personal belief, but I don't fully know because we've never been able to investigate it. We don't actually know because all the pushes to investigate were blocked by the CCP, and the World Health Organization even helped cover it up for the CCP. One of the reasons why Trump pulled us out the first time, and he's now pulled us out again from the World Health Organization. Let's see, another question here, realitysreal.com. Government and efficiency are synonymous. They should be. And that is the other issue too. One of the big, in my opinion, look, there's nothing wrong with government. Good government is fantastic. I think government is a necessary force. I would even say that in absolute anarchy, you immediately begin seeing people institute among themselves various forms of government. I believe government is a natural force instituted among human beings. At the very basic level, you have hierarchy. At the very basic level, when people are in a family, they automatically have some form of hierarchy. In an anarchist system, you will always have people immediately begin placing their trust in the person most willing to help out the community. For example, the person who people feel safest around, the person who is most able to defend them against harm, the person who is most willing to help out those around them. Those people oftentimes become the de facto leaders. Even in friend groups, you have the person you know who kind of calls the shots because that person is the most reliable, trustworthy, and has the best head on their shoulders, or is the most assertive and everybody just follows along. Human beings naturally appoint leaders. It is how we naturally operate. Now, the challenge with leadership is that as it becomes larger and more powerful, as we delegate more resources to it to strengthen it, and to allow it to have more authority, more power to fight off the dangers we might believe exist, or that do exist, and they always have, or even, for example, managing things like global diplomacy. What if a war breaks out? What if we have a civil disagreement and we want a mediating organization, and then you need a system of law? That is why we institute among ourselves government. The challenge you have is that as it gets larger and larger and larger, there's less and less and less accountability. And as it gets larger and larger and larger, money spent on it, money given to it might be spent on less useful things. And as it continues expanding and continues, the amount of laws continues to expand, the amount of regulations continue to expand. And rather than try to solve problems by eliminating things that don't work, they try to solve problems by creating additional bureaucracy, additional laws, and additional systems, which, rather than fix the problem, basically build new things on top of the existing problems, which have sometimes the effect of subsidizing problems. You institutionalize them. Once you have a system that has institutionalized problems and is unwilling to degrade itself, is unwilling to reduce itself, is unwilling to get rid of the things that don't work, then you have greater and greater forms of bureaucracy and greater forms of waste that create greater and greater problems for the civilization. And so in order to alleviate that, what you need to do is identify the things that are broken and fix them. Identify the things that don't work and eliminate them. Find the things that are, again, wasteful and over the limits of what is necessary and shrink it. That is the solution of fixing a system when it has reached that state. And I would argue that anything less than that only has the effect of subsidizing problems rather than fixing problems. And I would say, frankly, this is something that has existed through almost all of human history. If you want to read a book that very closely represents what I just said, you can read Frederick Bastiat's book, The Law, a very short book, which I highly recommend. It is one of my personal favorites. And you can also read, I say it often, Ludwig von Mises. He wrote a book called Socialism, which is fantastic and also covers a lot of these points. Let's see, another question here. Bellator Prodeo. You're saying the radical transparency push will outlive Trump's administration with the ability of the American people to pursue legal options based on the truths uncovered. Yeah, so again, Trump had an executive order for what he calls radical transparency. And that's a good point. Once people and voters and taxpayers become accustomed to seeing everything our money is being spent on, everything that's being cut, there's a possibility, and I think a likely possibility, that that will become an expectation. Now, nothing is eternally sustainable. Nothing will be maintained forever. Eventually, there probably will be challenges to it, and it will gradually be whittled away, and then we'll have to reevaluate ourselves. And at that time, in the very, very, far future, or whenever that takes place, people will again be able to look back and see what was done to fix this, and they may again turn to this as the solution, saying, hey, back in 2025, this is what was done, and this, again, whether you believe that fixes it or destroys it, this was the policy and this was the result. Historical precedent does serve as lesson for the effectiveness of policy. Now, the other side of it is this, is that if Americans become accustomed to transparency, it creates an expectation of transparency from government. And on that point, something interesting as well, That is when you get into the thing that I would say is most effective in actually changing a society. What is that? That is culture. In order to fully change a system, you cannot do it purely through the political system. You have to do it through the culture and the values of the civilization. If you want to make something sustainable, you have to embed the solution within the culture of the society. And anything that does not achieve that will not last. Now, many people would argue that, for example, what's his name? If you go back to Andrew Breitbart, he would say that politics is downstream from culture. And I think that is true. Politics, to an extent, is downstream from culture because the culture of the society is what informs the voter, and the voter basically votes based on their system of values. Even though we're voting for political systems, a lot of the debates we have are actually value-based or personal interest-based. But I would add to it that culture is downstream of religion. Religion forms culture, culture forms civilization. Civilization is what leads to politics. And I think that what America is actually having right now is actually more of a cultural rearrangement. And to an extent, I would actually say we're having a bit of a religious reawakening, whatever your faith may be. I do think that the talk of religion, the restoration of religion is being a point with debating politics. And even outside of that, public moral debates have become part of our political system yet again. I would say part of that is because of the Biden administration and because a lot of the policies overstepped the boundaries of politics to impact, people's beliefs. For example, the COVID vaccine mandates, a lot of people felt that that was a religious debate. People who maybe did not want to get the vaccine, some of them said it was a violation of their religion. They did not want to get it, and it violated their personal beliefs. And a lot of the court cases were based on that. A lot of the trans policies and the sex ed policies in schools, which actually were a huge motivator for a lot of women voters, a lot of the ones I talked to. Moms for America and Moms for Liberty and groups like that. For a lot of them, that was a moral debate, and morality is rooted in religion. And so that was really a religious debate we were having. I would say abortion is a religious debate, going into, do you believe in the existence of the human soul? And at what point of development do you believe the soul exists? Do you believe human life begins at birth? Do you believe the human soul exists at all? Do you believe it begins at conception, right? It's a religious debate. We're actually having a religious debate, whatever your belief may be. I have my beliefs, which I talk about. I do believe life begins at conception, but I'm not telling you all what to believe. Because again, we're actually having debates on religion. We're having debates based on value systems. And I would add to it, on that point, when we're having debates based on value systems, what does that lead to? You begin having religious debates under the guise of political debates. And I would actually argue the past 8 years, and folks, isn't it crazy? Look, the whole thing with Trump and this big shakeup in our country, whichever side of the aisle you stand on with it, that began in 2015. It's been 10 years. It's been 10 years. We've been having a value debate on the nature of government itself for 10 years on this front. And I would actually argue that we have seen a very large we've seen a very large reformation of government. The Republican Party right now is no longer the Republican Party of George Bush. The Democrat Party right now is no longer the Democrat Party of Bill Clinton. We live in a very different political time, a very different political structure. And I would say with that, very different debates on values in politics. And I do believe what has happened in this country is there's been a cultural shift. The cultural shift is what has led to the political shift. And I do believe the cultural shift will have a lasting effect on the nature of this country and the expectations of government. And so I do believe that on what Bellator Pro Deo said, yes, I do think this will be a lasting shift. I do think the policies introduced now will have a lasting impact. Denise B., you're saying, so need to check whether payment is actually going out at all, out to all dead people on these Social Security rolls. Yeah, so that's on the point of when we discussed payments that were going out to dead people in the unions. That is a big question that a lot of people have asked, right? When Elon Musk brought up the issue of Social Security and why he believes it's necessary for the Doge Department to actually investigate Social Security numbers, an act that Democrats have challenged based on privacy, saying that Elon Musk should not be able to get Social Security numbers, right? The argument on the Republican side is that, well, they've already found, he alleges, right? They've already found that there are more Social Security numbers than there are American citizens. I can't remember what Elon Musk said. He either said there are 1/3 or 2/3 more Social Security numbers than there are American citizens living. Meaning, 1/3 or 2/3, and you have to forgive me, I can't remember which it was. 1/3 or 2/3 of these Social Security numbers are possibly fraudulent. And that does raise the question of what they're being used for. Now, carry that out in terms of how the investigation is going. You have the Treasury Department being investigated, then you have the IRS being investigated. If they can find that there are, if they can identify which Social Security numbers are legitimate, which ones of those legitimate ones are being duplicated, because they also found that there's no limits to the amount of time you can duplicate even legitimate Social Security numbers, they can then identify which ones are legitimate and which ones are not. And then through the other investigations, they can then begin finding whether the illegitimate ones are receiving funds, whether the illegitimate ones are receiving social benefits or Medicare or Medicaid, whether they got COVID relief funds, whether they benefited from the various loopholes in the system. And that will then inform us as a society, again, whether we've been getting ripped off on a massive scale or not. I again believe we're at a point where you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Too much has now been told to the public for them to not get answers on exactly what has been happening. And on the point again of radical transparency, if Americans find out that we've basically been paying foreign fraudsters or been paying Medicare and Medicaid to an insane amount of fake Social Security numbers, or if we find that a lot of our tax money has been wasted, that will create a lasting expectation of transparency and a lasting expectation that we get told what our money is being spent on. Because it will, to an extent, damage people's faith in the integrity of the systems. And the only way you can maintain faith in the systems is through transparency, if that is to happen. And so we will see, right? Korean Yoon, you're saying, how in the world are dead people cashing checks? You can thank the old broken Social Security system for that, which Elon Musk seems to be uncovering right now. And again, there's also the issue of what they call ghost jobs. Previous investigations, even prior to what Trump is finding now, there have been previous investigations that found there were entire government departments that were fake. That basically what had happened was offices were created, people were hired, but they did not exist. There was no office, and the people working for that office, even though they were receiving payment, did not exist. And sometimes you also have something else, which is some people work for government, they don't actually do anything. The amount of oversight and the difficulty of firing people is very problematic. Not for all, but for some departments and some positions, there's not a lot of oversight. And in addition to there not being a lot of oversight, there's also not a lot of expectation of output. What you have had in some cases is that people get these jobs, they work remotely, meaning they don't have to show up for work in person, they collect a paycheck, and what happens when you work remotely, don't have to produce any tangible work, have very little oversight? Well, you basically don't have to work if you don't want to. And in addition to that, some of them, in addition to collecting a paycheck, they may also get side jobs. They may do advisory work for businesses even related to the department they work on, informing the agents or informing the private businesses based on insider knowledge they have access to through the jobs they're being given and barely do work for. And so this is one of the, I don't know how big of an issue that is, but this is one of the points that people like Elon Musk are using to say that we need to investigate whether this is happening or not, because there have been some cases where that has been found. We don't know the scale of it, but there have been cases where that has been found. Another question here from Jenna Talia. You're saying, Joshua, what agencies do you think may get abolished this year? Well, geez, I don't know. You do have some that seem to be getting folded into other agencies. For example, USAID appears to be getting folded into the State Department. It is possible the ATF could get folded into the FBI. We'll see what happens with the FBI now that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were in there. Remember though that Kash Patel, in addition to being the director of the FBI now, he's also the acting director of the ATF. There's talk also of getting rid of the IRS. Who knows whether they'll do that or whether they'll fold its operations into another department. You know, I mean, if you want to ask my opinion, I think in my personal opinion, there's the possibility if they can downsize it and if they can simplify tax filing processes, they might find a way to fold it into the Treasury Department. I do think that's a possibility. There's talk of making, for example, the Federal Election Committee directly answerable to the president's office, along with several other branches of government. There are, for example, talks of creating new departments. For example, instead of the Internal Revenue Service, we can have the External Revenue Service, the ERS. Trump said that during the campaign trail. We have not seen that fully done yet. That's a possibility. You might see the Department of Education get eliminated or folded into a different department. Maybe HHS, Health and Human Services, could maintain an education system that gives money for subsidies for, education programs, which would include, human interest things and public safety. There's a possibility they could find a way to do that. There are many ways they could fold agencies or delegate the jobs of agencies within others in order to consolidate and shrink the size of government, which is what Trump and Musk and many others are saying right now. The challenge in getting rid of a federal agency, though, is that you need Congress. And the question of whether they could achieve that without having to go through Congress, that's a whole other debate entirely. And so we will see if they're able to do it. That said, folks, I'm on the road. I'm actually in Texas right now. I'm at NRB, which is the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. If any of you are there, come say hi. I will not have a show tomorrow. Unfortunately, I'm at an Airbnb we have to check out, and the checkout time unfortunately conflicts with the time of the show. I apologize. I will not have a show tomorrow. But I will be back on Friday, and we're also publishing a lot of interviews. And so you can watch the interviews we're releasing. We're producing a lot of other content other than the live show, so be sure to check those out because we do have a lot coming out. We've had some great discussions already, a lot more to come. So stay tuned for that. I will again be back on Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Sorry, not Friday. Thursday, folks. We're only missing one day, not two. So Thursday, come back. And that said, folks, thank you so much. I will see you Thursday. Check out, in the meantime, the interviews we're publishing. Please give this video a like, leave a comment. And that said, folks, thank you so much for being here. Please take care of yourselves. And as always, stay informed and stay free. Thank you.